After already missing a large portion of the season with his shoulder injury, Kyrie Irving is at risk of missing more time with a knee injury that he just suffered against the Washington Wizards. Welcome back everyone to your #1 source for learning about everything related to sports injuries and sports medicine news. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Kyrie Irving's knee injury. As usual, we'll step through the footage of the injury and talk about what potentially could have happened here and kind of go over the news that we've gotten so far from the Nets and try to piece all this together. As always, go subscribe if you like this type of content and want to stay up to date with my future videos. Let's get started. Running the clip here of the injury, we can see Kyrie Irving driving in, basically gets tangled up here with Bradley Beal, causing Beal to sort of undercut his knee and cause that right knee to sort of get twisted and buckled up underneath Irving. Looking here from a different angle, we can see sort of same thing. Irving drives in, that right leg seems to get caught underneath Beal as Beal kind of goes down. And then that foot gets twisted, that knee looks like it gets twisted, kind of pops back out, and then right away we see Irving grab for his knee. To be totally honest, this one is a little bit tougher for me to watch and try to piece together what could have happened. A lot of times we see an injury and it's a very classic mechanism and we can very easily look at it and say what we think happened. But this is not really a classic mechanism for anything that we see in the knee with like the ACL, the MCL, LCL, PCL, any of these things. This really isn't a classic textbook type of mechanism. And so it's hard to just watch this and say, yes, this is definitely what I think is going on. There's pieces of the mechanism that line up with different types of injury patterns, but really nothing that, in my mind, all comes together to be one complete thing. But let's talk about what the Nets have told us so far about the injury, and then I'll step through the footage and kind of tell you guys what I'm thinking about at different positions in regards to possible mechanisms. So far, the word is Irving has a knee sprain. Now remember, sprains are used to describe injuries to ligaments like the ACL, PCL, MCL, or LCL, and a strain is used to describe an injury to a muscle. So the Nets are telling us that they suspect that Irving has some sort of injury to one of the ligaments in the knee, severity to be determined. His x-rays were negative, but unfortunately that doesn't tell us anything about the ligaments like the ACL and if they might be damaged in the knee. Going back to the footage here, there's a couple of key points that I want to focus on that make me think of possible injuries. The first two that I want to think of are the ACL and the MCL. As we play through this first clip here, keep an eye on Irving's right knee and kind of right in this position as Beal is starting to fall on him. You can tell how Beal's momentum almost looks to be kind of pushing from the outside of Irving's knee inward. We would call this kind of your classic valgus directed type of force. We can see this a little bit better from this back angle as we watch that right leg as Irving comes in. Remember, we're looking for any sort of force directed kind of in this direction, valgus into his knee. Now there's this one little bit right here, if we play this through, where you can see Irving's right knee sort of gets, boom, right there, kind of gets knocked inward from Beal falling down into him. Playing this back through again, just watch, boom, right there. There's that little bit of just kind of valgus hit from the knee getting pushed inward right there. The reason this concerns me a little bit is first off for the MCL. The MCL sits there on the inside of Irving's knee, and so whenever you have an excessive valgus load to the knee, that can cause the MCL to get injured. The MCL is more often injured when the knee is closer to extension or straight, and here Irving's knee is more flexed. This doesn't mean the MCL can't be torn, but again, this isn't really a classic mechanism like we would see for just a pure MCL injury. The other reason this sequence here of Beal's weight kind of collapsing in onto Irving's knee is important is because of the ACL. Remember again that our classic ACL mechanism is whenever we have that knee kind of collapsing inward with some rotation between the femur and the tibia. But again, oftentimes the ACL is torn when the knee is closer to an extended position, and Irving's knee is pretty flexed here as it kind of falls underneath of him. The other piece of this I want to focus on is the amount of rotation of his tibia that we can see from this back view. So as we play it through, Irving is collapsing here, and keep an eye kind of right here in this position where we can see Irving's shoe and his leg and kind of his whole alignment of his lower leg. In this position, his tibia is externally rotated. That foot is pointed out, and it's kind of hard to imagine all this because of how kind of we're looking at Irving from the back, but his tibia here is in a position of external rotation. Now there's different structures in the knee that prevent that external rotation depending on how straight or how bent the knee is. One of the key structures to prevent that external rotation is actually your popliteus muscle. You might remember CJ McCollum had a popliteus tear, And so it's possible when I look at something like this, I think, well, maybe there's been a popliteus tear. Also, your PCL helps with preventing external rotation of the tibia. And so that's another thing that sort of crosses my mind when we see this degree of external rotation being forced on the knee. But with a PCL tear, you've usually got a really strong force being directed into the knee, which we don't see here from Irving. And with a popliteus tear, oftentimes the knee is closer to being straight again. So all these things that don't really line up 100% with one specific mechanism. You can see really how much that foot's externally rotated as we play that clip through. You can see that foot really kind of whip back out as his momentum carries him over Beal, where now he's more in a neutral position with his knee and tibia alignment. Let's just play that through again. So Irving comes down. In this position, he's got his tibia and some external rotation. And then as his momentum comes off of him, it kind of snaps back around right there into a more neutral position. So if all that sounded confusing to follow and step through, don't worry, because this is kind of a confusing mechanism of injury. This reminded me of Trevor Lawrence back in the national championship game. Whenever he had his foot kind of caught underneath of him, we can see a similar sort of position here. I think in this case, it's his left foot, but again, it gets caught underneath of him and twisted awkwardly. And in this case, Lawrence was completely fine. He had no injury to that knee. Overall, I have a pretty low suspicion for a major injury for Irving, just based on what we know from the net so far. Our physical exam tests are actually pretty darn good with picking up ACL injuries, MCL injuries, and meniscus tears, especially in an acute situation like this. So the medical staff is going to be back in the locker room performing tests like the Lockman, the anterior drawer, the varus and valgus stress test to look at the MCL and the LCL, and they're already going to have a pretty darn good idea about whether or not they think he has a complete ACL tear or a complete MCL tear, or if it's just something like an MCL sprain. The fact that all we know right now is knee sprain tells me that there's probably not one specific thing they found on their exam that was clearly abnormal. I think if those physical exam tests would have shown something like concern for a full ACL tear, we probably would have heard about it by now. Overall, I'd probably put an MCL at the top of the list in terms of what I would bet on being most likely, but certainly we've still got to rule out an ACL injury and think about things like the meniscus tear, the PCL, and even stuff like the popliteus. So that's it for the video, everybody. Sorry again that I can't give a more definitive opinion here on what I think could have happened. Sometimes these are just tough, and it's hard to really piece together based on the angles that we see and kind of the mechanism what might have happened, and this is why we have our physical exam tests and do things like an MRI to really make sure we get the right answer. Let me know any questions or comments you guys have below, and until next time, we'll see you later.